Hello, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar coming to you live from the Teagasc studio in Carlow. Today we're celebrating the 150th episode of the Signpost Series. And it's hard to believe that it's almost 3 years ago since Ireland entered into its first lockdown. In our first episode, we broadcast live from the simple surrounds of my daughter's bedroom. So needless to say, we've all come a long way since then. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our many speakers throughout the series, our fantastic team, Yvonne Maher, Andy Boland, Pat Murphy, Catherine Keena and Declan McArdle, and our industry partners, and of course you, the audience, for your continued support throughout the series. To mark this occasion, I'm delighted to welcome our Director, Professor Franco Mara, to give us an update on the new Climate Action Strategy recently launched by Teagasc. Frank, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Mark. And look, it's a pleasure to be here. It's a big milestone actually for you and the team, the 150th webinar. And it's been a very important series for Teagasc to develop actually, and very successful in terms of knowledge dissemination and communication. And look, full credit to you and the team for establishing it. And obviously you've created something that has resonance with people because you've been able to keep it going for 150 episodes. And I've no doubt your daughter is glad that you're out of her bedroom now at this stage, and we're in the surrounds here today of the Teagasc studio in Carlow.
Absolutely, yes, it is. It really shows the journey that we've been all on over the last number of years. Frank, if we could go straight into this morning's discussion. Earlier this week, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they published an important report where they said that without critical actions in the form of deep, rapid and sustained greenhouse gas reductions, we will shoot past the 1.5 degrees temperature increase and possibly even 2 degrees by mid-century. Are you concerned about the potential consequences for agriculture in Ireland?
Yes, so look, the report that came out this week was a synthesis report of the three component parts of the IPCC's assessment that were published over the last 2 years. So it pulls together that, and really what it's setting out is in stark terms the challenge that we face to keep within the target of 1.5 degrees, which is very, very challenging, and certainly within 2 degrees. And look, it calls that we need urgent action. And I suppose we see that translated down here in Ireland with our government's policy to reduce our emissions by 51% by 2030. So, rapid and deep cuts. And we're all working hard to achieve those. And look, in terms of the impact of not achieving them, or even the impact of the change we're seeing in our climate to date, and that's likely to happen as a result of the glide path we will have to net zero by 2050. Certainly, look, agriculture is hugely weather dependent, and we need rain, but we don't need too much of it. We need sunshine, but we don't need too much of it. So we all know the consequences, we'll say, of periods of drought. Or periods of long and continuous rainfall for our grazing system or our crops. And obviously we want to avoid those extremes of weather for agriculture, and also look for our whole society and economy because of the disruption that they can potentially cause.
And of course, it's a global response that's needed to curb that change, isn't it?
Absolutely. Look, and it does require every country to do something. But I suppose, every country has to take on that challenge. We can't wait for every other country. Some countries should take a lead. And I think, look, Ireland and the EU in particular see themselves as in a position and wish to take a lead in terms of action in this really, really challenging problem.
So the Irish government has published its Climate Action Plan, which and the legislation attached to that. And it has assigned a target of 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the agricultural sector. How confident are you that we're going to achieve that?
Yeah, so look, some people might say that's a low target in comparison, we'll say, to the targets given to the energy sector. And but agriculture is a sector where the emissions are very, very difficult to mitigate. So 25% is actually a very, very challenging target for the agriculture sector. And to do that by 2030, it really will push the system in terms of how it can respond. But look, it can be done. We see the pathway to doing that being in 3 stages. One, we need to adopt the technologies that we already know about. And that's things like our protected urea, or reducing fertilizer levels through introduction of clover, or improving aged slaughter. we have a lot of technologies in the pipeline that are almost ready to be, deployed at farm level. And so as they become available over the next few years, the second phase is really to see those being adopted on farms, and that's things like widespread reductions in age at slaughter, maybe the introduction of feed additives for ruminant animals. And then we still, that will get us maybe 2/3 of the way, and the last third of the journey is going to require, new technologies that are to be developed that are currently just at an early stage. And but I'm confident, with the research pipeline that's there, that we will see additional technologies emerging over the coming years. And of course, we'll have the challenge then of supporting farmers to adopt all those technologies at farm level. So look, it can be done, and I'm determined that Teagasc will play its part in terms of the research and the advisory support that's needed to farmers, and the education of our young farmers, that we will step up to the mark in terms of playing our role to ensure that those targets can be achieved.
Okay, so we're now going to talk about the Teagasc Climate Action Strategy, but before we do that, we're going to hear what farmers are doing to respond to the climate challenge.
Climate change is probably the greatest challenge facing the world right now. We all have a role to play in reducing its impact through the choices that we make. The Signpost programme is supporting and enabling farmers to make the right choices.
We want to leave this farm in a better condition than we got it in. We are fortunate to live in a beautiful part of this world.
Our children and all future generations of our family, the local community and wider society deserve the same opportunity to enjoy this beautiful country.
Well, look, it's inevitable that we're going to be introducing regulations to help us farm in a more sustainable way, which I fully agree with. And I'd rather make those changes now to suit my farming system, as opposed to those regulations being imposed on me in the future. I want to be sure that the customer wants to buy the product that I produce. The customer is getting more and more aware of the environment and how food is produced on farm.
I want to do my share to reduce emissions, which will hopefully help reduce the risk of severe weather events happening, like the ones we had in 2018. We all have a role to play, no matter how small.
Implementing the technologies to reduce emissions is a win-win for my farm. Many of the changes that I'm making are also helping to reduce my farm costs.
Are part of the solution to climate change. Carbon farming, forestry, energy generation and diversification will all offer opportunities to me and others.
So, Frank, there's no doubt about the commitment from farmers to address this challenge. Can you tell us about this climate action strategy that Teagasc has recently launched and its significance?
Okay, well, look, two things, I suppose. We have been active in climate research and advising farmers around the technologies to reduce emissions for many years, so it's not like we're starting now. But with the government's climate action plan and the new carbon budgets that were set recently, we recognised we needed to up our game in relation to what we were doing across both research, advice and education. So that's what our climate strategy was about. And look, we recognise we're not the only people that are going to change this. Like ultimately it's farmers, like we've just seen, the actions that they take are going to make the difference to our emissions. But they need support from as I see it, three sectors. They need support from government, who are responsible for how our whole agriculture system is organised and regulations. So government have a very important role to play. I think industry have an important role to play in terms of incentivising farmers in relation to the practices maybe that by which food is produced. And there's a huge role then for research and innovation. And that's where we have a role to play. And we're stepping up, I suppose, with our strategy now to say we're going to, lead that pillar of research and innovation and support farmers as they go on the journey to meeting our targets by 2030.
Okay, so if we can take a look at the individual components of the strategy, the Signpost, the Climate Advisory Program or Signpost Advisory Program, what's your ambition around that particular aspect of the strategy?
Okay, so look, there's three parts to it, maybe just as well, Mark, to set the background. There's the new Signpost Advisory Program, we have a sustainability digital platform, and we have a new research centre, a virtual research centre. And they're all interconnected in terms of how we will respond or how we will support farmers in this challenge. So the Signpost Advisory Program is about working with individual farmers to create a plan for their farm. It's building on a program that we already had, the Signpost Farm Program, which is a network of 120 demonstration farms around the country. And it was this series of webinars was established around the time we were establishing that Signpost program. And when we're coming now to our new Signpost Advisory Program, if we didn't have the demonstration farm part, that would be the first thing we'd be putting in place. So we've got that building block in place. We're building now on top of that. So the new service will be available to all farmers. And as I said, a farmer that enters this program, we will help him or her to know what their current emissions profile is on their farm, and then generate a customised plan or a farm-specific plan to how to reduce those emissions, and we'll support them then over 3 years to actually achieve that reduction in emissions and implement the plan for their farm. So we're putting in place a new team of advisors in relation to that, and most of those now are selected, and intensive training will start next month, and we'll start the workshops with farmers to kick off this process in the next month or so. So it's an exciting time for us. We would hope over the next 5 years that we would enroll 50,000 farmers in this program, and by that we hope it's going to have a very, very significant impact.
And for the farmers who are watching us this morning, what would you say to them? Why should they engage with this program?
Well, look, I think, as you said earlier, there is buy-in from farmers. They want to address this problem. They realise it's there. They're part of society. They understand the importance of addressing it, and they understand the target that agriculture has been set. So this is an opportunity now for a farmer to I suppose get on the track to reduce their emissions. So often farmers say, well, I don't know where I'm starting from. So the first thing we're going to do is tell you where you are now, where you're starting from, and then what would work on your particular farm. So we'll identify 4 or 5 things, at the start that will be the plan for that farmer, and we'll help you to implement them. And we can help you to track your progress over that period. So look, it's a way to future-proof your farm. This is not going to go away as an issue. I think every farmer is going to have to address it in the end of the day. So, why not get in early and get on the road to getting your farm in the place that it needs to be?
I met with Mary Donnelly before Christmas, the chair of the Climate Change Council, and Mary, we were talked about the continuous monitoring that's happening around the targets and how close that we are to the targets. But she did say if we don't hit these targets or even the midterm targets, that there could be consequences or tightening of restrictions around agriculture. Is that a concern?
Well, look, it's the same for all sectors. We have targets. We have a 2030 headline target of reducing emissions by 25%. But, you know, there's a carbon budget for the period up to 2025. And so that's a big milestone. And if we haven't stayed within our carbon budget by 2025, it makes the period after 2025 going to be more challenging. The deficit will be brought forward for us. So the sooner we take action, the better. And look, it's not for me to say what the consequences of not reaching the targets are. That's obviously a decision for government. But I'd much prefer that we're not in a position of having to worry about that. Let's try and meet these targets and all put our shoulder to the wheel, and I think we can.
So we really need to hit the ground running on this. You talked about the demonstration farm network. What about the Teagasc farm network? What's happening there within Teagasc's farms?
So look, we obviously have a lot of farms ourselves in our agricultural colleges and our research centres, and we're obviously, you know, it's really important that we are adopting best practice on those farms as well, and we are, you know, we've a group of very committed farm managers, and they understand what needs to be done. So, you know, we are, I think, at the forefront. I was just looking at the figures for last year. So over 80% of our nitrogen was applied as protected urea versus a national target of getting to 50%. So, you know, we're well embedded with that technology. In terms of slurry, all our slurry is applied by low emissions slurry methods, and again, about 80% of it was applied by the middle of June, with, you know, a target we would have set of about 75%. So again, we exceeded that on our farms. And you know, there's lots of other measures, and we generally tend to be doing all those things. And one that I'd pick out is we planted over 25 kilometres of hedgerows on Teagasc farms in the last 3 years. So, you know, again, that's a commitment to improving biodiversity on our farms, as well as the potential carbon capture of those hedgerows.
Would you have any concerns, Frank, about the level of investment that's needed on farms to achieve these goals? I mean, what impact is that going to have on profitability of farms? I mean, we see already a lot of investment in storage, and new low emission spreading machinery. You know, is that trajectory going to continue?
Look, we're very conscious that sustainability is not just about environmental sustainability, and from a farmer's perspective, the economic sustainability of their business is paramount. And so the technologies that we develop or that we encourage farmers to adopt, they're generally cost neutral, or very often they'll result in farmers saving money or making more profit. So, for instance, replacing chemical nitrogen with biological fixed nitrogen from the air through the use of clovers, like that's a win-win. Now, it's a difficult technology to implement, so, you know, farmers need support in relation to the adoption of clover, and that's where our Signpost advisory program comes in to give them that support. Likewise with protected urea, like it is cheaper form of nitrogen than calcium ammonium nitrate. So we're very conscious that the technologies need to be ones that farmers won't reject because they're going to cost them more money or result in reducing profitability. In terms of investment on farms, look, the slurry storage on farms, obviously farmers have to comply with the minimum amount of storage. It's something I think I'd very much like to see, you know, farmers in a position that they can decide when to use their manure, their slurry, you know, that it's not dependent on the slurry store being full. So that if they wish to hold it for another few weeks until grass has grown a bit better or whatever, that they're in a position to do that. So I think that's a good position for farmers to be in, because that's a hugely valuable resource you have in those tanks, and you want to be able to use it to best effect and get the best monetary value out of it. So investment in slurry storage, I think, is something we will see more of going on farms, as a lot of farmers are on a development plan. So that would be very much part of their planning, I'm sure.
Okay, we're going to take a look at the other aspects of the climate action strategy now, and we're going to hear how farmers are how the digital sustainability platform is being developed to support farmers in this change.
The objective of the Sustainability Digital Platform is to create an infrastructure to facilitate robust calculations of the environmental impact of a farming system. The calculations are based on significant research by Teagasc on life cycle assessment models over the past few years. They have now been adopted across the agriculture sector. The first phase is to develop a decision support tool to support farmers and advisors on recommended management practices that can improve a given farm's performance. This phase is focused on beef and dairy systems. However, the overall objective is to cater for a wide range of farming systems in Ireland. The Sustainability Digital Platform is an industry-wide collaboration between Teagasc, ICBF and Bord Bia. Farm data residing in existing databases will be collated to maximise the automation potential of the assessment process, which will improve accuracy of the results to support decisions and ensure transparency.
The Sustainability Digital Platform will be piloted on Teagasc Signpost Programme demonstration farms before being deployed to all commercial farms. The Sustainability Platform will be used to establish the baseline performance of an individual farm. This decision support tool will be used by advisors and farmers to determine the impact of key recommended practices to reduce emissions and enhance removals, which in turn will contribute to a farm-specific action plan. The platform will be co-designed with advisors and farmers to ensure, firstly, that it's user-friendly, secondly, interactive, and thirdly, informative. This infrastructure will ensure that each farm will be provided with results based on the same calculations. The Sustainability Digital Platform will ensure that each farmer knows their number and can make a plan to reduce environmental impacts.
And just to remind you that if you do have questions that you'd like to send through to us, use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen and we'll get to those questions at around 10:10. So, but we'll continue with our discussion around the Teagasc Climate Action Strategy, and maybe to elaborate on the digital sustainability platform. Could you tell us more about that, Frank?
Look, this is a really important development for Teagasc and for Ireland. I think, I suppose the background to it was we didn't have any tool that our advisors could use with farmers, to set out, well, where are you now and what's the best thing for you to do on your farm, and what impact would there be on your emissions if you adopted protected urea or if you switched to clover-based systems. So, we had all the models at a research level, but not that could be used by a farmer, him or herself, or by one of our advisors. So that's what the digital platform is. And so we wanted to build that decision support tool, but we didn't want to build it in a way that we'd have to spend half a day asking farmers to fill out forums or collecting information from them. So we're building, it's pretty unique in the world now. This is going to basically use databases to collect virtually all the information that we will need to do an inventory of the emissions on a farm. And then it has this decision support capability that working live with it, you can see, well, what's the impact of reducing my fertilizer by 20% or 30%? How I do it now is the hard bit, by bringing in clover, but what would be the impact on my emissions or of switching to protected urea? And that then allows a farmer working with an advisor to create a plan for the next couple of years. And look, it's a very, very challenging thing to develop. We're doing it at pace. We couldn't do that without working in partnership with ICBF and Bord Bia. So the three organisations are working together. We think it's very important that we work, with Bord Bia, so we don't have duplicate figures going out to farms or duplicating what they might be doing through the quality assurance schemes. But this tool now will be the centre part of our Signpost advisory programme. As Siobhan said, it'll be the start where a farmer gets to know his or her number and can make his or her plan. And then the advisory programme kicks in after that to help them implement the plan.
I think it's great to see that collaboration, particularly at a farm level where you're not seeing that duplication of effort or having to re-input. There's nothing more frustrating than having to put the same information into several different systems. So I think it's great to see that coherency coming through. If we could just move to talk about the Climate Virtual Research Centre. This again is quite a unique effort within Teagasc.
Yes, so look, people will know Teagasc has 6 research locations around the country. And, people will be familiar with Moore Park or Grange or Athenry or Johnstown Castle and so on, here in Oak Park where we are. And there's climate-related research going on in all of those centres. So we felt there was a need and an opportunity to better coordinate that research by putting it under one umbrella, not in a new physical centre, but in a virtual centre where we're pulling together all the strands of research, making sure we're getting the synergies from different groups and the collaboration that's necessary. And also it will allow us to collaborate externally, both with organisations here in Ireland and indeed internationally. So having a kind of a single structure coordinating what we're doing, we felt was important. But also we obviously need to accelerate the research that's going on. So we're putting extra resources into that centre. We're expanding the research programme. As I said, we need, we don't have many years to go to 2030. We have a lot of research that needs to get done by then. So it's really important that we accelerate the pace of the research.
And what will the nature of that research be? Will it, in terms of the mix of short-term versus long-term and the different disciplines? Because I think I saw on the report that behavioural science will be a part of this as well, which is an interesting development.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I suppose it's got to be a big focus on mitigation, whether that's mitigating nitrous oxide emissions or mitigating methane emissions. Be a big focus on carbon sequestration, or reducing the emissions of carbon from some of our soils, our drained peats. A big focus on diversification, and the research we might need in relation to that, and adaptation to the changing climate. And look, across all of that, behavioural science is really important, to understand what it is that might be barriers to farmers adopting some technologies that to a researcher might make huge sense and be very logical, but maybe there's some barrier there to them. And the last dimension of the centre then will be supporting government in terms of support to policy formation. And Teagasc already does a lot of that, and we need to be in a position to respond very rapidly to the policy needs of government. So look, that's, I suppose, trying to put a coherent programme around all of that and ensure that there's the maximum collaboration and synergies and speed is what the establishment of this centre will give us.
And will farmers have the opportunity to be involved in that research programme, or how can they engage with that?
Absolutely. Well, look, we have lots of channels that we communicate and our research out to farmers through the advisory service or open days or whatever. But we also do quite a bit of on-farm research. So the Signpost farms that we mentioned earlier, there's 120 of those. They're very much involved in our soil carbon research. So we're going to measure the soil carbon on those farms. So they're a very important part of that. And look, there's lots of other things that we do on farm that will happen over the course of the next couple of years.
You mentioned soil carbon and the area of sequestration. There's a lot of discussion around that in recent months and years about that are we under or over reporting the amount of carbon that our typical farms in Ireland can sequester. What's the position on that?
Yeah, so look, the position is that at the moment we don't have very detailed country-specific information for Ireland, so we're using international default values. That's the procedure that you use when you don't have your own country-specific information, as most countries don't indeed. So what that's saying to us is that for approximately 400 million hectares of mineral soils are sequestering somewhere around 2 million tonnes of carbon per year, but on our drained peat soils are emitting about 8 million tonnes. So there's a net emission from our agricultural soils of about 6 million tonnes. Now there's huge uncertainty around those figures, and that's why there's a need to generate these country-specific values. So we have a big research programme going on at the moment to do that. And look, it's early days yet with the research, but hopefully the positives, the sequestration might be getting a little bit underestimated currently, and maybe the emissions from our drained peats are not as big as we're currently calculating, but the research remains to be done.
There's been an enormous effort by farmers and Teagasc over the past 30 years or more to improve the efficiency at a farm level. Has this low-hanging fruit been gathered already, do you think? Or, are we moving into territory now where we are actually trying to reach the harder to reach areas?
Look, I would say there's still a lot of relatively low-hanging fruit. Like Ireland, our production system for our main enterprises, which are dairy and beef and indeed sheep, is pretty unique in the world. It's a grass-based system, and that actually does give you a pretty low carbon footprint to start with. So you might say we're already a fairly low carbon footprint country. That leaves us less room to improve. But within that system, by the reduction of chemical fertilizers through either clover or switching then what we do continue to use to protect urea, by rearing our animals more efficiently and getting to their target slaughter weights at a younger age, like that still is pretty low-hanging fruit that we can go after, and they're generally win-wins for farmers. So I think there's still a lot of scope for us to take emissions out of our system before we get to maybe some of the more difficult technologies like feed additives, or in particular a feed additive that will work all year round in a grazing situation. That is a difficult research challenge. There's also difficult research challenges around breeding animals that are specifically low methane emitters, but there's research underway on that. So there's a combination of low-hanging fruit, or stuff that we can get at now, stuff that's coming fairly soon, and stuff that is going to take a lot of research before we're ready to start taking it out to farms.
So beyond the efficiencies and the technologies, what other routes are being explored for farmers to try and reduce their overall emissions from their farms?
Okay.
So and I suppose at the same time increasing the value of the output from their farm, whatever activities they are.
Yeah. So look, and it's very important to remember that farming is an economic activity. The purpose of it is to produce food. Ireland is an important country in relation to food production. We're small, but we still make a significant contribution to global food supply, and we don't want to damage that food production capacity while we find ways to reduce our emissions. So in terms of sort of other things that we're doing, other than I've just outlined, actually one thing that's quite important is to continually improve the calculations we have, or the way we calculate our emissions. And agricultural emissions are harder to calculate than energy emissions, and we're constantly finding ways to improve the calculation method. So we have a couple of important pieces of research that are coming to fruition in relation to the amount of methane that our grazing animals are producing. We've some new information on that is very encouraging looking. It's currently going through the peer review process. We've also a better way of calculating the lifetime emissions of our beef cattle. That's a more accurate, that's kind of taken advantage of the very good database we have in this country on our animals. So that's hopefully going to feed into our calculations as well over the next year or two. So that's one additional strand of work that we have going that's very important. But another very important strand of work that we're supporting is diversification. And the government have through various schemes or through the Common Agriculture Policy, they've created opportunities in relation to organic farming, and we've put a lot more resources into supporting farmers on that journey or already in organic farming. There's a new forestry program that's currently being processed in Brussels in relation to state aid approval, and I think that's going to be attractive to a lot of farmers. Certainly there's a lot of inquiries in relation to it, so that's another, I suppose, diversification option available to farmers. There's a big ambition in relation to our energy supply in this country to increase the amount coming from indigenous resources, and one of those is gas from anaerobic digestion. So again, that's going to be an opportunity for farmers to grow feedstock for that, or indeed to transfer their slurries into an anaerobic digestion system and get back the residual manures, which still contain most of the nutrients, by the way. So we will see those diversification opportunities also emerging, and we'll certainly support farmers that wish to engage in those.
Because I suppose it speaks to that just transition to where nobody gets left behind in this transition to a low carbon economy. Another dimension to diversification, and it links to a question that has come in from our audience here, is around forestry, and it's the role it has to play in climate action. And the question is, what can Teagasc do to, I suppose, support the sector more and maybe to inform the narrative around forestry, because I mean there is a negative connotations around afforestation as well. So is there work that we can do there?
So look, the government have a very ambitious new forest strategy, and there's a new vision for forestry in Ireland, and as I mentioned, there's a new program, a new 5-year program with I think 1.3 billion in investment in that's going to kick off fairly soon. So look, what can Teagasc do? Well, you know, we're looking at that new forest strategy and its ambition, and have we got sufficient resources for that? And look, we're talking to the department in relation to that. Do we need to put more resources into that? That's certainly one thing we have to think about. I think one of the things that I like about the new forestry program is the support for smaller areas of forestry. Now, I know from a commercial perspective that mightn't be the ideal, but I think what it is going to do is draw a lot more farmers into forestry, maybe to plant that 2 hectares or whatever it is that is not much use for commercial farming activity, but you know, they might see it as a potential investment for the future. So, and I think that kind of spreading out of forestry rather than concentrating it in particular locations or particular parts of the country will be a very good and healthy development for the acceptance of forestry by rural communities. So, you know, we will give farmers whatever support they can in terms of assessing the options of forestry on their particular farms and supporting them through the process of establishing forestry and managing it for the future if they decide to go down that route. We also, you know, want to up our research in relation to forestry, in particular, maybe, you know, its impact on carbon sequestration. It's not an area we're strong on, so we see a gap there. And you know, we all know what has happened with ash over the last couple of years, and I suppose again, you know, the pests and diseases of forestry is an area that there's not huge strength in the organisation in, so it's something we would like to be able to address. So certainly is very much on our sights as to what we can do in relation to forestry.
Okay, we have a question in from our audience, and do please keep your questions coming through to us. A question around livestock emissions. What is the timescale for the adoption of the new information on emissions calculations in livestock post peer review by the EPA? In what timescale can this realistically make a difference in your view?
Okay, a good question. So look, in relation to the Irish inventory, the EPA are responsible for that. So, but they are always looking to see is there new and emerging science.
Okay, apologies for that break in transmission. We will keep going with our interview this morning, and do keep your questions coming through to us. So thanks for staying with us. Just to finish out that last question, Frank, in relation to the timelines.
So I would say 1 to 2 years. Of course, now it's not a panacea. You know, making a more accurate inventory it doesn't bring about a reduction in your emissions because the baseline is recalculated as well. But at least you would be working off a smaller baseline. So 25% of a smaller number is a smaller number.
Mm. Okay, thanks for that. In relation to renewables, and the question coming through here, in light of the most recent IPCC report, does Teagasc see an emerging role for itself to advise landowners to adopt and invest in renewable energy as a source of income for farmers, as Denmark has done? So
look, I think we do. We are very aware of, we'll say, the benefits of rooftop solar, and now that the changes that have been brought in terms of availability of TAMS grants and that it's actually quite an attractive proposition, I think, for many farmers, especially if they have a good energy use on their own farms, so in particular dairy farmers and pig farmers. So that's something we're very conscious of, and we've got tools to allow farmers calculate for themselves what the payback period would be. In terms of other renewables, look, anaerobic digestion, I think, is an industry that's going to get going. So that's one, again, where we're actually building a pilot scale anaerobic digester in Grange that should be open shortly or in operation shortly, we hope. And so we are and will be in a position to advise farmers on the options.
So do you see that as part of the role of these new signpost advisors that are going to be hitting the ground shortly?
Absolutely. And look, I suppose just in relation to the signpost advisors, I think it's very important that we do have a cohort of people whose, this is their focus. But that's not to say that all our other 250 advisors that service our 40,000 odd clients won't also be very involved in terms of supporting farmers on this journey and advising them about the technology. So this is very much a whole of organisation response.
Question around the digital platform, and that it's commentary here that it looks like a great tool to make a plan, but how will we monitor the progress, which is probably the essence of what
absolutely.
Because we have a great reputation in this country for making plans, but the implementation and monitoring and execution of plans is going to be really crucial, particularly in this instance.
So the tool will allow every year the farmer or the advisor to actually see what happened in the preceding year. So once you come to the end of the year and all the information is in about the number of animals on the farm, which will be captured in the ICBF database, their productivity, which again will be captured through the database, and fertilizer use, we'll be able to run the emissions profile for the farm for that year and see what progress was made in comparison to the previous year. So that will be part of the program, is to track the progress each year of the 3 years that we'll be enrolling farmers into the program.
Okay. A question in relation to the need to reduce the slaughter age of animals, and that a farmer will a farmer not just simply replace those animals on his or her farm immediately with no net benefit for reducing emissions? So maybe it's a technical one of sorts, but you could try and explain that to us.
It is a really good question, and I guess if there was an unlimited supply of cattle to go onto farms, that could be the outcome. But we have a fixed number of calves born every year in the country, or relatively fixed. It's it depends on the number of breeding cows, dairy cows and beef cows. So that's not going to change just because farmers that are rearing and finishing cattle are finishing them a little bit earlier. That's a separate cohort of farmers making their decision as to the size of their herd. So I think what it will mean is, it will allow, really the way we see it, it will allow farmers maybe to save on some expensive inputs and maybe not need as much silage or whatever on their farm, and be able to run their farm more efficiently.
Okay, so it needs to be looked at a kind of a national
level, exactly,
really,
yeah.
Okay, a question in relation to biogenic methane here, and the work that is being done by Professor Miles Allens in this whole area. Should methane produced by animals not be classed, or why should it not be classed as a greenhouse gas, or why is it classed as a greenhouse gas? Maybe is the question.
Okay, so look, the work of Miles Allen and others in relation to how methane should be assessed is very important, and look, we're very aware of that. And without going into the detail, but basically nobody can methane is a greenhouse gas. It does trap heat in the atmosphere, and if the concentrations of it are increasing, it's trapping more heat. But if the concentrations are stable, which can be the thing because it degrades fairly fast in the atmosphere, unlike CO2, well then it's not causing any additional warming. So I think that's a very important concept in terms of how we will assess agricultural methane in the future. The issue for why we're maybe not doing that now, well, Ireland doesn't set the rules as to how we calculate our inventory. The EU really is the I suppose, authority that Ireland has to follow in relation to that, and indeed our own legislation requires that we achieve this 51% reduction using the GWP 100 methodology. I know we're getting very technical now, but the person obviously is quite aware of all this that asked the question. So look, to me, it would be really important that agricultural methane is assessed on the basis of GWP star, or we have a separate target for it in the post-2030 period. And that's not just in Ireland, but that will have to happen at a global level.
A question in relation to the national tillage area, and have Teagasc a role to support the government incentive to increase the national tillage area? Because I know there are some concerns around, particularly also with solar farms being erected on tillage land, and is there a risk there of compromising the total area? Because last year last year or the year before we had a major, I suppose, food security concerns, and there was incentives put in place to support expansion of the tillage sector.
Yeah, and there was a small increase in the area under tillage last year. And the government in the Climate Action Plan have set a target for 400,000 hectares of tillage by 2030, which would be an increase of about 50%. But what we're seeing happening this year is probably going in the opposite direction, because we see a lot of demand for land by dairy farmers in particular because of changes in the water regulations, and that is competing with land that tillage farmers might have used in the past or might be interested in using. So look, I think this is going to require a policy response. I see the minister the other day has announced the formation of a food vision tillage group, which will look at how the sector can evolve and reach that target of 400,000 hectares. And we'll be very keen to be involved in that and to support the work of that group and the subsequent work then in terms of rolling out whatever initiatives might be put in place to help the sector achieve that target.
A question in relation to a meat summit that Teagasc was involved in last year. And the question here is, why was a state agency involved in such a conference on meat?
Yeah, okay. Well, I could ask why not. So we hosted an international conference on the role of meat in society, and the purpose of the conference really was, you can distill it down to say it was about what is the science saying about meat, not just in terms of the one dimension of what are the greenhouse gas emissions associated with meat production, but what has been the role of meat in our evolution, what's the role of meat in nutrition, what's the role of meat in relation to biodiversity and soil health, what's its role in relation to economics and livelihoods, what's its role in relation to our culture, and what's its role in relation to environmental challenges, including greenhouse gas emissions. So, we had experts that spoke on all those themes. The papers will be published in a special issue of Animal Frontiers at the end of April or early May. And it was trying to draw together the science around meat, because very often people just think about greenhouse gas emissions when they look at our cattle herd or our meat production. And, what we're saying is, when you're evaluating the role of meat, look at the science, see what the science says in relation to the many areas of which meat is important.
Okay. Thanks for that, Frank. Is there any financial impact studies being done on the impacts at farm level for engaging in climate plan requirements?
Yeah, well, look, at the farm level, all the technologies that we would be advising farmers to implement would be cost neutral or cost beneficial, as I mentioned earlier. In relation to the kind of overall impact on the sector, let's say, we were asked to model, what would be the impact of a 20 or 30% reduction in the output or the cattle herd. Yeah, we can do that and have in the past done that sort of scenario modelling for both the Climate Change Advisory Council and indeed the Department of Agriculture. And it comes out as big sums, hundreds and hundreds of millions in terms of lost revenue, both at farm level and the knock-on impact on the supply sectors into farming and the processing sector and the food businesses that rely on the food being produced.
We're going to go on a slightly different tangent here around education and forestry, and why is it not part of the Green Cert as an enterprise? I'm not sure how accurate that is, but
yeah. So look, I mentioned earlier that we're looking at the government's new strategy in relation to forestry, and one of the significant elements of that is that the need for training, both at from operative level right through to graduate level. And Teagasc has a role to play in training, and we're looking at how we could best organise ourselves and what resources would we need to be able to effectively meet the training needs of the sector, what our role might be.
I understand there's a new strategy being developed for the education programs in Teagasc as well?
There is, yeah. So we have that education. I look at our education service, but we're separately, and the two will come together obviously. What would be our role in relation to forestry education and training? And I think Teagasc has an important role to play in that.
Okay, yeah, lots of interest in forestry here in the questions this morning. In terms of diversification, can Professor O'Mara comment on the potential of hemp as a crop in its own right, as a carbon sequestration crop, and as an indigenous source of animal feed?
Right. Well, look, I am far from a hemp expert. Look, it is a crop that there's an interest here in Ireland. There are a number of growers, and we provide some information in relation to that. I know there are technical difficulties in relation to the growing and of hemp and or the harvesting and use of the products of hemp, again because of its relationship with prohibited substances. I'm not that familiar with all of that, but you know that is a challenge for the industry. It is a crop that sequesters some carbon, to the best of my knowledge, but it is a niche crop certainly at the moment. So it's not in the immediate future, I think, going to be a major crop, but it's certainly one that we're interested in seeing how it might develop and what policy support might be put in place to help the development of that.
Okay. A question here around the amount of food that we produce here in Ireland, and we know that we export about 90% of our meat and our milk. And why is Ireland committed to producing these large amounts of food, given the potential environmental impact that it can have?
Okay, look, a really good question, and one that you often hear people discussing that or debating that. Look, we're good at producing milk and beef off grass. That's our competitive advantage here as an agricultural country. We're not good at producing many other foods like oranges or bananas and or coffee, and we import those from countries that are good at producing them, and we export what we're good at producing to those other countries. And that's the way the world's food system is organized, and it's a good way to organize it, that you produce things in the regions where they are most efficiently produced. And that leads to actually, the more we can optimize that, the more we will reduce global emissions from the food system. Having said all that, obviously each country then is responsible for its own greenhouse gas emissions. So, that doesn't give us a get out of jail card in relation to, produce as much food and never mind the emissions. We still have to meet our national targets for greenhouse gas emissions, and that's the challenge we and the whole agri-food sector has, is to be able to maintain that food production while at the same time reducing those emissions.
This morning we've spoken pretty much solely about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, but I know that an important part of the climate action program, even though it's called Climate Action Strategy, is biodiversity and water quality.
Yeah.
Could you tell us more about what the ambition is there within the plan?
Yeah, so look, I think a lot of these issues, they're very interconnected, and we should not tackle them as single issues. And so look, I think everything we will be doing in relation to creating plans for farmers will be compatible with good water quality and improving biodiversity on farms. So for instance, we didn't talk much about planting hedgerows, or we talked a little bit about forestry. They can be, when they're done right, very important contributors to improving biodiversity on farms. We talked a little bit about clover, and indeed the multi-species swards, again, can be very good in relation to improving biodiversity on farms. In relation to water quality, both for greenhouse gas emissions and for water quality, one of the key things is to improve the efficiency with which we use fertilizers and nitrogen, improve that nitrogen cycling. So the two go hand in glove, and what's positive for one is generally positive for the other. So look, I suppose we are very much tackling these in a holistic way, even though we're leading out and saying, we really need to tackle this climate challenge through the Climate Action Strategy.
Okay, we have about a minute or so left, and I want to ask you about the whole area of carbon farming, if we can do that as briefly as possible. But it is something that has been discussed a lot, and what role do you see farmers playing in future markets, carbon markets.
Yes, yeah. Look, I think we are slowly but surely seeing the structures emerging in relation to, first of all, having better knowledge about what's happening carbon on farms, and then being in a position to increase it or change it in a positive direction. And ultimately, I think we will see encouragement, financial encouragement or incentives or schemes in place to support farmers in doing that. This earlier or late last year, the Commission brought out a discussion document around carbon farming, which really set out the parameters about how you would measure and verify it. And I think that, okay, it's not a carbon farming scheme, but that's a very important building block on which you would build future carbon farming schemes, because you need to be able to measure and monitor and verify what has happened on soils. And so I think we will see it, but it will be slow probably to emerge as an enterprise on farms.
Okay, so we'll have to watch that space. Frank, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure.
We're just out of time now, but I don't know where that hour went. I want to say a big thank you to our audience for bearing with us this morning during our technical difficulties. Next week, we'll be joined by JJ Lenihan, who's going to be speaking about biomethane as an opportunity for Ireland. And so JJ will be joining us next Friday morning. I want to say special thanks to Declan McArdle for supporting the production this morning, and I want to wish you all a very nice weekend, and thanks for joining us this morning.